I
I used
still
to make
remember the first
sweaters for
time I
my
met Leela.
children.
The day was warm and
Now they
unusually
send
bright for
texts
early
on
March.
holidays.
I'd spent the morning carefully pressing the edges of
I
my
used to
navy
make
blue blouse,
sweaters for my
the one with the
children.
small embroidered flowers
Now
on the
they
collar.
send texts
It
on
wasn't
holidays.
fancy, but it was special to me. Daniel had
I used
gifted
to
it to
make
me on my
sweaters for my
50th birthday,
children.
back when he still
Now
noticed
they
what made
send
me smile.
texts on
Now he
holidays.
was introducing me to his fiancée. I stood in the
I
little
used to make
Italian
sweaters
cafe
for
he
my
had chosen for
children.
the meeting,
Now they
nervously
send
smoothing my
texts on
skirt as I waited.
holidays.
The tables were too close together and the
I
music a
used to
bit too
make
loud.
sweaters for my
But the
children.
staff was kind, the kind
Now
that
they
refilled
send
your water
texts
without
on
asking and
holidays.
called you ma'am with soft eyes. And then she
I
walked
used to
in,
make
Leela
sweaters for
tall,
my children.
effortlessly elegant,
Now
dressed
they
in a
send
sharp white
texts
blazer
on
and gold
holidays.
heels that clicked across the tiled floor. Her
I
makeup
used
was
to make
flawless,
sweaters for
hair
my
slicked into a
children.
ponytail so perfect
Now
it
they
almost
send
looked
texts
sculpted.
on
She looked more
holidays.
like a magazine editor than a bride 2-B.
I used to make
Daniel
sweaters for
rushed
my
to pull her
children.
chair out, grinning ear
Now
to
they
ear.
send texts
Mom,
on
this is
holidays.
Leela. Leela, this is my mother.
I
Her
used to
eyes
make
flicked over
sweaters
me
for
in
my
one
children.
swift scan, like a
Now
barcode.
they send
Then she
texts on
smiled, tight,
holidays.
professional, with no warmth. Oh,
I
she
used to
said
make
lightly.
sweaters for
I
my
thought you'd be
children.
more,
Now they
elegant.
send texts
Just like
on
that, Daniel
holidays.
chuckled awkwardly. I think he thought she was being
I used to
playful.
make
I
sweaters
forced
for
a
my
soft laugh
children.
too, choosing not
Now
to
they
dignify
send texts on
What else could I do?
holidays.
The waiter arrived at that exact moment
I
with
used to make
menus,
sweaters
and I
for
grabbed
my
mine like a
children.
shield. We spent the
Now they
next 40
send
minutes sipping
texts on
tea
holidays.
and nibbling on tiny pastries that crumbled before they
I
reached
used
your
to make
mouth.
sweaters
I
for my
asked Leela
children.
about her work, marketing,
Now they
for
send
some luxury
texts on
skincare brand,
holidays.
and she answered with a glossy, well-rehearsed
I
tone.
used to make
Everything
sweaters
about
for
her
my
was
children.
curated. She asked me
Now
nothing,
they send
not where I was
texts on
from,
holidays.
what I liked, how Daniel had grown up.
I
Nothing.
used to make
When I
sweaters
mentioned
for
how
my
Daniel
children.
loved camping as a child,
Now they
her
send
eyebrows
texts
lifted.
on
Camping,
holidays.
she repeated, almost like she'd heard a
I
foreign
used to
word.
make sweaters
That's
for my
cute.
children.
Cute. Like he'd once been
Now
a
they
rescue
send
dog.
texts on
Still, I
holidays.
smiled. Because I wasn't here to fight.
I
was
used to
here
make
to welcome.
sweaters for my
Later,
children.
as we stood to leave,
Now
I
they
reached into
send
my purse
texts
and
on
pulled out a small
holidays.
velvet pouch. Inside was my late mother's
I
gold
used to make
locket, old
sweaters
but
for my
precious.
children.
I handed it to her.
Now they
For
send
you,
texts
I said gently.
on holidays.
It belonged to my mother, and I always hoped I'd give
I
it to
used
the
to
woman
make
Daniel
sweaters for my
chose.
children.
Leela blinked at it like
Now
it was
they
a
send
souvenir
texts
from a
on
thrift store.
holidays.
Double quotes. Oh, thank you, she said,
I used to make
slipping it into her
sweaters for my
handbag like it might
children.
tarnish the lining.
Now they
As I
send
turned to leave,
texts on
I caught
holidays.
Daniel's eyes. He gave me a look I hadn't seen since
I used
college.
to make sweaters
Proud,
for my
hopeful,
children.
but helpless too.
Now they
Maybe
send
he knew.
texts
Maybe
on
he didn't want to
holidays.
admit it. But I had seen enough. Leela
used
was
to
not
make
just
sweaters
uninterested
for my
in family.
children.
She was indifferent to
Now
it.
they send
And indifference
texts on
is colder than
holidays.
cruelty. If you've ever smiled through disrespect
used to
just to
make
keep peace in
sweaters
the
for my
family,
children.
hit subscribe. This
Now they
story is
send
for you.
texts
2
on
weeks after our
holidays.
cafe meeting, Daniel called. Mom,
I used to
he
make
said,
sweaters for
a little
my
out of
children.
breath. Leela wants
Now
to
they
handle
send
most of the wedding
texts on
herself,
holidays.
but she asked if you could contribute something sentimental.
I used
You
to
know,
make sweaters
something with
for
meaning.
my children.
I smiled,
Now
despite
they
myself.
send texts
I'd be
on
happy
holidays.
to, I replied. Sentimental is something I know well.
I used to make
He laughed.
sweaters for my
I told
children.
her that. I said no one
Now they
does heart
send
like you.
texts on holidays.
That made me tear up, just a little. Even
I
after
used to make
everything,
sweaters
he
for
still
my
saw me.
children.
I spent the next
Now
few
they
days
send
preparing a
texts
gift
on
that would reflect
holidays.
both sentiment and legacy. In the top drawer
I
of my
used to make
dresser,
sweaters
wrapped
for
in
my
tissue,
children.
was something I'd held on to
Now
for
they
years.
send texts
A delicate
on
silver
holidays.
necklace with a teardrop-shaped pendant. Inside
I
it,
used to make
a tiny
sweaters
photo
for
of
my
Daniel as a
children.
baby taken the morning
Now
after
they
his father
send
died.
texts on
That
holidays.
necklace was my anchor through widowhood. I almost
I used
never
to make
wore it.
sweaters for
But if
my
there was
children.
ever a moment to pass it on,
Now they
it
send
was this one.
texts on
I
holidays.
paired it with a handwritten note. Dear Leela, this
I used to
necklace
make
carried a piece
sweaters
of
for my
Daniel's
children.
babyhood with me through every
Now they
difficult
send
moment of our
texts on
life. I hope it
holidays.
brings you the same strength and love it once gave
I
me.
used to make
Welcome
sweaters
to our
for
family,
my children.
Mira. I wrapped
Now
it in
they
a soft
send
cream box
texts
and
on
tied it with a
holidays.
satin ribbon. It wasn't fancy, but it was
I used to
deeply,
make
painfully
sweaters for my
real.
children.
The following Saturday,
Now they
I
send
visited their
texts
apartment
on
to drop it off.
holidays.
Leela opened the door, barefoot,
I used
in
to
silk
make sweaters
pajamas,
for my
coffee mug
children.
in hand. Oh,
Now they
you
send
didn't
texts
call.
on
I just wanted to
holidays.
deliver this myself, I said, holding
I
out the
used to make
box.
sweaters for
She
my
took
children.
it, glanced at the ribbon,
Now
then
they
opened
send
it casually.
texts on holidays.
When her eyes landed on the necklace, she blinked twice.
I used to make
Then she looked
sweaters
up
for
at
my
me and said
children.
with a slight smile,
Now
"Oh,
they send
it's
texts
sweet,
on
definitely.
holidays.
Homemade." I felt the words cut like glass.
I used to make
Homemade,
sweaters
as
for
if
my
that made it
children.
lesser. As if the
Now
love
they
in it
send
meant nothing
texts
because
on
it wasn't
holidays.
gold-plated or bought from a boutique. Before I could
I
speak,
used to make
she set it
sweaters for
on
my
a
children.
side table next to her phone
Now they
and an
send
open makeup
texts on
bag, and
holidays.
said, "I'll let Daniel know you came by. Thanks
I
again."
used to make
And
sweaters
just
for
like
my
that,
children.
the door closed.
Now
I
they
walked
send
back to my
texts
car
on
slowly.
holidays.
My hands trembled on the steering wheel.
I
Not
used
with
to make
rage,
sweaters
no.
for my
I don't
children.
give rage, that is easily.
Now they send
But with the ache of
texts on
being seen as
holidays.
small when you've lived so large in silence.
I used to make
Still,
sweaters
I
for
told
my
myself,
children.
maybe it's just nerves.
Now they send
Maybe she doesn't
texts
realize
on
how it came
holidays.
off. But something inside me whispered otherwise.
I used to make
Not
sweaters
nerves,
for my
not
children.
accident. It was who she
Now
was,
they send
and I had just
texts on
handed a piece of my
holidays.
past to someone who didn't recognize its worth.
I used to make
People
sweaters
think
for
dignity
my children.
comes from what you own.
Now
But for
they
me,
send texts
dignity
on
came from
holidays.
surviving and choosing not to become bitter in the
I
process.
used to make
After that
sweaters
day at
for
their
my
apartment,
children.
I went home and placed
Now
a
they
kettle on the
send
stove,
texts on
just like I had every
holidays.
evening for the last 20 years. Chamomile
I
tea,
used to make
2
sweaters for
sugars,
my children.
1 quiet room.
Now
I
they
sat
send
in the old
texts
armchair
on
Daniel used to
holidays.
jump on as a child. The springs still
I
slightly
used to make
crooked from his
sweaters for
boyhood
my
games,
children.
and let myself remember.
Now they send
I hadn't
texts
always
on
lived like this,
holidays.
calm, clean, alone. There
I
were
used to
years
make
when the walls
sweaters for
echoed
my
with bills
children.
unpaid and a child's
Now they
feverish
send
cries.
texts on holidays.
After my husband passed, Daniel was only 3. I
used
remember
to
the
make
day like it was
sweaters for my
stitched into my
children.
bones, me in a borrowed
Now
black
they
dress,
send texts
one
on
hand holding my
holidays.
son's, the other trying to hold myself upright.
I used to make
He asked
sweaters
me why
for
everyone
my
was
children.
crying. I told him
Now they
because
send
Daddy was a good
texts
man,
on
and we miss
holidays.
good men when they leave. But I never told him how
I
scared
used
I
to make
was,
sweaters
not
for
about the
my
world,
children.
but about failing him.
Now they send texts
I worked 2
on
jobs
holidays.
for years. Mornings, in a grocery store bakery.
I used to
Nights
make
cleaning
sweaters
offices.
for my children.
My shoes never lasted more
Now
than a
they
few
send
months.
texts on
My hands
holidays.
were always cracked in winter. But Daniel never
I
knew
used to
hunger.
make sweaters
Not
for my
once.
children.
And when he turned 10 and told
Now
me,
they send
"Mom,
texts on
I want
holidays.
to be someone important," I looked him in the eyes and said,
used to
"You
make
already are."
sweaters for my
I didn't
children.
raise him to chase glitter.
Now they
I
send
raised him to
texts
carry
on
gold
holidays.
in his soul. I made investments early, quiet
I used
ones.
to make sweaters
After
for my
years
children.
of working and saving, I bought
Now
my
they
first
send
rental home.
texts on holidays.
Then a second. I didn't flaunt it. I just knew
I
that
used to
wealth
make
meant
sweaters
peace,
for my
and peace
children.
meant Daniel wouldn't have to
Now
watch
they
me
send
struggle.
texts on
And still,
holidays.
I never once reminded him of it. I wanted him
I
to
used
love
to
me
make
as a person,
sweaters for my
not a
children.
portfolio. I was
Now
never
they
interested
send
in
texts
control,
on
just
holidays.
connection. I thought when he married, I'd gain a daughter.
I used to make
I didn't
sweaters
realize
for my
I'd be
children.
told, wordlessly, cruelly,
Now they
that I
send
was merely a
texts on
formality.
holidays.
What if the person you looked down on owned the very roof over
I
your
used to
head?
make sweaters
Subscribe
for my
now
children.
if you know karma always comes
Now
home.
they send texts
The wedding
on
took place in a
holidays.
sprawling country estate, just outside the city.
I used to
the
make
kind of
sweaters
place with
for my
swan
children.
fountains, floral arches,
Now they
and
send
uniformed
texts
staff
on
who offered you
holidays.
cucumber water with silent smiles. I
I
arrived
used
early,
to make sweaters
not because
for
I
my
wanted to
children.
impress anyone.
Now
I
they
simply
send
didn't want to rush.
texts on holidays.
I had spent the previous night staring at the ceiling,
I used
wondering
to make
if I was
sweaters
making a
for my
mistake
children.
even coming. But I
Now
told
they
myself,
send texts
this is
on
still your son's
holidays.
day. You raised him for this. You show
I
up.
used to make
I
sweaters
wore my
for my
soft gray
children.
sari with the delicate
Now
silver
they
border.
send
It had
texts
once
on
belonged to my
holidays.
mother-in-law, and wearing it made me feel held.
I used to
Like
make
generations
sweaters
of
for my
women who
children.
had survived worse were standing
Now
with
they
me.
send texts
The venue
on
buzzed
holidays.
with excitement. Guests in silk gowns and tuxedos.
I used to make sweaters
Tables
for
lined
my
with
children.
imported roses.
Now
The
they
air
send
thick with
texts
perfume
on
and
holidays.
expectations. I searched for Daniel, but was
I
told
used
he
to
was
make
busy
sweaters
preparing,
for my
so I
children.
quietly took my seat. Row
Now they
4,
send texts
left
on
side,
holidays.
a few rows behind the groomsmen and college friends.
I used to
Not
make
family
sweaters
row.
for my
I
children.
didn't complain. I just
Now they
sat,
send texts
alone,
on
when the
holidays.
ceremony began. Leela descended the marble
used to make
staircase in a
sweaters
satin
for my
gown that
children.
shimmered like snow under the
Now they
chandeliers.
send texts
People
on
gasped.
holidays.
She was stunning, and she knew it. She reached
I
Daniel,
used to make
who looked
sweaters
nervous
for
but
my
proud,
children.
and the ceremony went
Now
on.
they send texts
I watched
on
my only
holidays.
child exchange vows. While seated next
I
to
used to make
strangers who didn't
sweaters
know
for
my
my
name,
children.
there was no special
Now
mention
they send
for the groom's
texts on
mother, no
holidays.
rose given, no thank you spoken,
I used
just
to make
soft music
sweaters
and
for my
forced
children.
smiles. Later,
Now
at
they
the
send
reception,
texts
I
on
approached the gift
holidays.
table and gently placed my offering, the same
I used
photo
to make
album I had
sweaters
spent
for my
weeks
children.
assembling. Each page
Now
held
they
pictures
send
of Daniel
texts on
as a child,
holidays.
with handwritten captions, tiny stories,
I used to make
and blessings
sweaters
for their
for my
future.
children.
It was a piece of my heart
Now they
wrapped in
send
linen and
texts
ribbon.
on holidays.
An hour later, while guests mingled and champagne flowed,
I used to make
I saw
sweaters
Leela
for
open
my
it.
children.
She turned to pages,
Now they
paused,
send
and let out a
texts
small
on
laugh.
holidays.
"This is cute," she said aloud, voice
I
light
used
but
to
sharp.
make sweaters
"We
for
don't
my
do poor
children.
gifts in this family, but I
Now
guess
they
it's
send
quaint."
texts
People
on
laughed
holidays.
softly around her. unsure whether to agree or
I
cringe.
used to make sweaters
I
for
stood
my
there,
children.
only a few feet away.
Now they
She
send
hadn't even
texts
noticed
on
me.
holidays.
I turned and walked out before anyone could see the way my
I
lip
used to make
trembled.
sweaters for
On the
my
way
children.
home, I didn't cry.
Now
I
they
just sat
send
on the train,
texts on
holding my purse
holidays.
tight in my lap, like it might fall apart if I let
I
go.
used to
By
make
the time I
sweaters
stepped
for
into
my
my house,
children.
the decision had
Now
already
they
been
send
made.
texts
They had
on
given me no
holidays.
place at that wedding, so I would give them no place in
I
my
used to make
silence anymore.
sweaters for my
The
children.
next morning, my phone buzzed.
Now they send texts
Daniel,
on
I
holidays.
let it ring twice before answering. My voice was steady.
I used to make
His
sweaters
wasn't.
for my children.
Mom, he said, I saw
Now
you
they
left
send
early.
texts on
Leela
holidays.
told me there was a misunderstanding.
I
I
used
almost
to make
laughed.
sweaters for my children.
Misunderstanding. That's what
Now
we're
they
calling
send
open
texts
mockery
on
now.
holidays.
Instead, I replied softly. I wasn't
I
feeling
used to
well.
make sweaters
There
for
was a
my
pause,
children.
too long. Then he
Now they
cleared his
send
throat.
texts on
She didn't mean to
holidays.
offend you. She was nervous, you know.
I used to
Hosting
make
that many
sweaters
people,
for my children.
everything had to be perfect.
Now they
I
send
didn't answer
texts
right away.
on holidays.
I wanted to give him the space to say more.
I
to
used
say
to
he
make
noticed
sweaters for my
that
children.
he saw me, even in the background,
Now they send
but
texts
nothing
on
came.
holidays.
Only silence, thick and cowardly. So I
I
said
used
it
to
for
make
him.
sweaters
She
for
laughed
my
at my
children.
gift. Daniel,
Now
in
they
front of
send
everyone,
texts on
she called it poor.
holidays.
Another pause. She didn't say it like
I
that.
used to make
He
sweaters
began,
for my
but I cut
children.
in gently. She did,
Now they
and you
send
didn't stop
texts
her.
on holidays.
I could hear his guilt through the phone, like static in the
I
background.
used to make
Mom,
sweaters for
I
my
just,
children.
I didn't want to ruin the
Now
mood.
they send
I
texts
nodded,
on
even though he
holidays.
couldn't see. Of course, I said.
I
Your
used to
mother's
make
dignity
sweaters
wasn't
for
worth
my
the
children.
discomfort of a pause. There was
Now they
nothing
send
left to say after
texts on
that. We
holidays.
ended the call with the same hollow kindness
I
that
used
had
to make
become our new
sweaters for
tradition.
my children.
I sat at the window afterward,
Now they
tea
send
untouched,
texts on
the sky
holidays.
outside dimming into a dull gray. The trees
I
swayed
used to
like they
make
were
sweaters for my
whispering things
children.
I already knew. I
Now
had
they
been
send
small enough to fit
texts
in
on
everyone's
holidays.
shadow, even my own son's. But now,
I used to
now
make
I was done
sweaters for my
shrinking.
children.
If kindness is mistaken
Now
for
they send
weakness,
texts
then
on
silence becomes
holidays.
permission. And I had been silent long enough.
I used to make
If you've ever been
sweaters
the
for my
silent builder
children.
behind someone else's
Now they
success
send
and they forgot,
texts on
hit that
holidays.
subscribe button. The reveal is just beginning.
I used to make
The
sweaters
house
for
stood
my
quietly
children.
at the edge of a leafy neighborhood.
Now they send
Pale
texts
brick,
on
red
holidays.
door, a wraparound porch. To
I
anyone
used to
passing
make
by,
sweaters for
it
my
looked like a
children.
charming newlywed home.
Now they
What
send
no one knew,
texts on
not even
holidays.
Leela, was that I owned it. 5 years ago,
I
when
used to
Daniel
make
landed his
sweaters
first
for my
big job
children.
and talked excitedly about
Now
buying
they
a home,
send
I
texts
listened.
on holidays.
He was young, ambitious, full of dreams, but his
I used to make
finances weren't
sweaters
ready
for
for a
my
mortgage,
children.
not yet. So
Now
I
they
offered a
send
solution.
texts on
Why don't you find the
holidays.
house you want, and I'll buy it under my trust.
I used to
You
make
can live there,
sweaters for my
build your
children.
life. No rush to
Now
pay
they
me
send
back.
texts on
He
holidays.
resisted at first, but I insisted. It's still
I
yours,
used to
baby.
make sweaters
Just
for my
on
children.
paper. It stays with me for
Now
now.
they send texts
He hugged me
on
that day,
holidays.
teary-eyed, said I was the best mother in the world.
I used to
I
make
never
sweaters
reminded him
for
of
my
it again.
children.
I never even
Now
stepped
they
foot in
send
that house
texts
once
on
after they moved in,
holidays.
until now. That Monday, I called my
I used to
lawyer,
make
Mr.
sweaters
D'Souza,
for my
an
children.
old friend of my husband's.
Now they
Quiet,
send
efficient,
texts
and
on
precise.
holidays.
You're sure? He asked. Once the withdrawal
I used to
papers are
make
filed,
sweaters for
they'll
my
have 30
children.
days to vacate.
Now they
I'm
send
sure,
texts
I
on
said,
holidays.
voice calm as glass. He adjusted his glasses.
I used to make
You've never
sweaters
touched
for
this
my
asset
children.
in 5 years. Any
Now they
reason
send
now?
texts
Yes,
on
I said,
holidays.
folding, my hands in my lap.
I used to
Because
make
my gift
sweaters
was
for
laughed
my
at,
children.
and this house was a gift too.
Now they send
just didn't know
texts
it.
on holidays.
The next day, the papers were prepared. I didn't
used to
feel
make
angry.
sweaters for my
I didn't feel
children.
triumphant. I just
Now
felt
they send
clear.
texts on
People say
holidays.
revenge is sweet, but this wasn't revenge. This
I
was
used to make
remembering
sweaters
who
for my
I was
children.
before I let people forget.
Now they send
I stood
texts
outside the
on
house one
holidays.
evening, across the street, watching as fairy lights
I used to
flickered on
make
the balcony.
sweaters for my
Leela
children.
was inside, holding a
Now
wine
they
glass.
send texts
She laughed
on
at something on her
holidays.
phone, tossing her hair like she was the queen
I
of
used to
something
make
important.
sweaters for my children.
She had no idea the land beneath.
Now they send texts
Her feet
on
didn't belong to her,
holidays.
not legally, not emotionally,
I used
not
to make
anymore.
sweaters for my
3
children.
days after signing the withdrawal
Now they send
notice,
texts
I
on
invited them to
holidays.
brunch. I told Daniel I wanted to talk things
I
through
used to
and
make
perhaps
sweaters
mend
for my
fences, which
children.
was true. In a way,
Now they
what I
send
didn't say
texts
was
on
that I already
holidays.
had the envelope ready in my purse.
I
Sealed and
used to make
stamped.
sweaters for
They
my
arrived
children.
20 minutes late.
Now
Leela
they
walked
send
in
texts
first,
on holidays.
in a white pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, even though
I
we were
used to
sitting
make
inside.
sweaters for my children.
Daniel followed, looking
Now they send
distracted,
texts
already
on
scrolling on his
holidays.
phone. Oh, Leela said,
I
scanning
used
the
to make
table.
sweaters
You
for
went
my children.
minimal, cute.
Now
I
they
smiled.
send texts
I thought
on
we could keep it
holidays.
simple. The food is is homemade. She gave a
I
polite
used to
little
make
grimace,
sweaters for
like
my
she was
children.
bracing for food poisoning.
Now they
Daniel
send
sat across from
texts on
me.
holidays.
Mom, you didn't have to cook. We could have ordered in.
I used to make
I wanted
sweaters
to,
for my
I said.
children.
They both picked at
Now
their
they
plates
send
while I
texts
served
on
tea.
holidays.
Layla looked around the room. I really
I
think
used
we
to
should
make
upgrade our
sweaters
kitchen
for
next
my
year,
children.
she said to Daniel.
Now they
The
send
tiles are
texts
so
on
basic.
holidays.
My hand froze on the teapot. Basic.
I used
The
to
same
make
house they
sweaters
lived
for my
in.
children.
The one she redesigned in
Now
gold
they send
accents and
texts on
fake marble
holidays.
wallpaper. The house I bought. The house
I
she
used to make
criticized with
sweaters
such
for my
comfort.
children.
I reached into my purse
Now
and
they
placed
send
the envelope on the
texts on
table.
holidays.
What's that? Daniel asked. A transfer
I
notice,
used to make
I said
sweaters for my
calmly.
children.
From my lawyer.
Now
Leela
they
blinked.
send texts
A transfer
on
of what?
holidays.
Possession. I replied. I've
I used to
revoked
make
the
sweaters
trust
for my
agreement on the
children.
house. You'll have 30
Now they
days
send
to vacate.
texts on
For
holidays.
a moment, there was silence. The kind that
I
hums
used
in
to
your
make
ear,
sweaters
loud
for
with
my
disbelief.
children.
You can't be
Now they
serious,
send
Leela
texts
said,
on
half laughing.
holidays.
We live there. No, I said.
I used to make
You've lived
sweaters
well,
for my children.
but it was a gift. And
Now
last
they
week,
send
you made it
texts
clear
on
how little you
holidays.
value my gifts. Daniel looked like he had been hit
I
in the
used to make
chest.
sweaters
Mom,
for
why
my
now?
children.
We just got married.
Now they send
Because I made a
texts on
mistake, I
holidays.
said quietly. I mistook silence for peace.
I used to make
and
sweaters
I let you
for
forget
my
what
children.
generosity looks like.
Now
Leela
they send
reached for the
texts
envelope
on
like it might
holidays.
burn her. This is insane.
I used to make
You're evicting
sweaters
us.
for my children.
I smiled gently.
Now they
No,
send texts
I'm correcting
on
an oversight.
holidays.
They stared at me, stunned, and for the first
I
time
used
in
to make
years,
sweaters
I
for
felt
my
tall.
children.
Ever dreamed of taking
Now they
back what's
send
yours
texts
without
on
raising your
holidays.
voice? Subscribe. Dignity is the
I
loudest
used to make
revenge.
sweaters for my
They came to
children.
my house the very next
Now
evening.
they send
Daniel
texts
was on the
on
porch before I
holidays.
even opened the door fully. Mom,
I used
he
to
said,
make sweaters
voice
for
thick
my
with
children.
panic. Please,
Now
we need
they
to
send
talk.
texts on
Leela stood a few
holidays.
steps behind him, arms folded, lips
I used
pressed
to make
into a tight
sweaters
line.
for my children.
Gone was the cool glamour now.
Now they send
she looked like
texts on
someone who had finally
holidays.
been told no for the first time in her life.
I used to make
I
sweaters
stepped aside
for my
and let them
children.
in. The air
Now
inside
they
was
send
calm.
texts
I had
on
already brewed
holidays.
tea. Chamomile, of course. We sat at
I
the
used to
kitchen
make
table.
sweaters
The
for my
same table
children.
where Daniel once did his
Now
homework.
they send
The
texts
same table
on
where I
holidays.
had once cried silently over unpaid bills so he
I
wouldn't
used
hear.
to make sweaters
He looked
for
around,
my children.
suddenly, small,
Now
in the
they
room
send
where he had once
texts on
ruled as a boy.
holidays.
Why are you doing this? He asked, pleading.
I used to make
You're
sweaters
not like
for
this.
my children.
I wasn't, I said quietly.
Now they send
But
texts
apparently,
on holidays.
being like me meant being disrespected, dismissed, and
I used to
forgotten.
make
It
sweaters
was just
for
a
my
comment.
children.
Leela said, jumping
Now
in.
they send
You're blowing
texts
it
on
way out of
holidays.
proportion. You're acting like some petty
I
old
used
woman.
to make sweaters
That
for
did
my
it.
children.
I didn't raise my voice.
Now they
I didn't
send
even blink.
texts on
But I leaned
holidays.
forward just enough for my words to land with
I
precision.
used to make sweaters
You mocked
for my
the necklace
children.
I gave you. You
Now
laughed
they
at my
send
album in
texts
front of
on
strangers.
holidays.
And when you said, we don't do poor gifts, you
I used to
insulted
make
more than
sweaters
just
for
me.
my children.
You insulted the years I spent
Now they send
sacrificing so
texts
Daniel
on
could have anything at
holidays.
all. Leela rolled her eyes. It was a
I
joke.
used to make sweaters
No,
for my
I said.
children.
It was a mirror.
Now they
She
send
froze.
texts on
I turned to
holidays.
Daniel. And you. You watched it all happen.
I used to
You
make
stayed
sweaters
silent.
for my children.
And silence, my son,
Now they
is a
send
decision.
texts on holidays.
He opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say.
I
You'll
used
have
to make
30
sweaters
days,
for my
I said,
children.
standing. After
Now
that,
they
the
send
locks
texts
changed.
on holidays.
Leela stood too, trembling with rage. You'll
I used
regret
to make
this.
sweaters
I
for
gave
my
her the
children.
smallest smile. No,
Now
dear,
they send
you will.
texts on
Because when you
holidays.
build your life on someone else's grace and then spit on
I
it,
used to
you
make
never think
sweaters
the
for
floor
my
will vanish?
children.
They left
Now they
quietly.
send
No more
texts on
arguments. Don't
holidays.
leave the truth. Echoing behind them like a door
I
softly.
used to make
finally
sweaters for my
closed.
children.
It was a Saturday morning
Now
when the
they
moving
send
truck
texts
arrived.
on holidays.
Not a large one, just enough for what could be. Packed in
I
a
used to
hurry,
make
I stood
sweaters for
across
my
the street,
children.
under the shade of a
Now
jacaranda
they
tree,
send texts
sipping
on
tea from a travel
holidays.
mug. I hadn't told anyone I'd be there.
I used to
I
make
just
sweaters for
wanted
my
to witness
children.
it, not for revenge.
Now they
for
send
release.
texts on
Layla
holidays.
came out first, barking orders at the movers while
I used to
clutching a
make
designer
sweaters for
handbag
my
like it was a
children.
lifeline. Her phone was
Now they
glued to
send
her other
texts
hand.
on
Her voice
holidays.
clipped as she narrated half loud into her Instagram story.
I used to make
double
sweaters
quotes,
for my children.
... Anyway,
Now they send
guys, the
texts
saddest
on
thing just
holidays.
happened. Long story. Toxic family
I
drama.
used to make sweaters
We're being
for my
forced out of our
children.
house. It's really
Now they send
heartbreaking.
texts
She
on
sniffled,
holidays.
carefully angling her phone to capture her fake tears.
I used to make
I
sweaters
almost
for my
laughed,
children.
but then Daniel stepped outside.
Now they send texts
He looked
on
tired,
holidays.
older than 30, not in age, in energy.
I used to
He
make
dragged a
sweaters
box
for
labeled
my
wedding
children.
gifts, fragile, and set
Now
it
they
gently
send
near the
texts
curb.
on
Our
holidays.
eyes met. He paused. I didn't wave.
I used to make
Neither did
sweaters
he.
for my
Instead,
children.
he nodded just once.
Now they
not
send
with anger,
texts on
not
holidays.
even apology, just understanding.
I
Maybe
used to
he'd
make
finally seen
sweaters
it.
for my
The
children.
neighbors had started whispering.
Now they send
I overheard
texts
2
on
women as they
holidays.
walked past me on their morning stroll. Didn't she
I used
insult
to
his
make
mother at the
sweaters
wedding
for
or
my
something?
children.
I heard the house wasn't
Now
even
they
in their
send
name.
texts
Can
on
you imagine?
holidays.
I didn't need to imagine. I
I
lived the
used to
kind
make
of silence
sweaters
that
for my
people write off
children.
as weakness.
Now
I
they
watched as
send
Leela shoved a
texts
tray
on
of crystal
holidays.
glasses into a box without wrapping them.
I
They
used to
clinked
make
loudly.
sweaters for my
She muttered
children.
something under her breath.
Now they
Then
send
she paused and
texts on
turned to Daniel.
holidays.
You should have stopped her. He didn't answer.
I used to make
Just kept
sweaters
taping a
for my
box.
children.
By 4 p.m.,
Now
the
they
truck
send
pulled away.
texts on
The door to the
holidays.
house stood wide, open, and for the first time in
I
years.
used to make sweaters
I
for my
crossed the
children.
threshold again. The
Now
air
they
smelled
send
different,
texts on
like lemon
holidays.
polish and empty pride. I walked from room to room.
I used to make sweaters
Every photo
for
of
my
them
children.
was gone, but the corners I
Now they
once
send
painted were still
texts
there.
on holidays.
The windows I had chosen. The backyard
I
fence
used
my
to make
husband helped
sweaters for
build
my
before he
children.
passed. And for the first
Now they
time,
send
the
texts
silence
on
inside
holidays.
didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace.
I used to make
When people
sweaters
finally
for my
see the
children.
truth about you, after judging
Now
your
they send
silence, it hits
texts on
different.
holidays.
Subscribe if you believe quiet power always wins.
I used to
A
make
month later,
sweaters for my
the house
children.
was mine again, not just
Now
legally,
they send
but
texts
emotionally.
on holidays.
But I didn't move into it. Instead, I
I
transformed
used to
it.
make sweaters
I
for my
partnered with a
children.
local women's nonprofit
Now
and
they
turned the
send
house into a
texts on
retreat center,
holidays.
a place for women rebuilding after loss,
I
trauma,
used to make
or
sweaters
silence.
for my
We added a
children.
reading room, a small
Now they
studio
send
for
texts
painting,
on
and a garden
holidays.
where morning tea is served under the shade of lemon trees.
I used to make
We
sweaters
named it
for
Grace
my
House.
children.
Daniel never came
Now
to
they
visit.
send texts
Not
on
yet,
holidays.
but I heard from him a letter. Handwritten. He said
I
he
used
was
to
sorry.
make sweaters for
That
my
he
children.
finally saw everything he had
Now
ignored.
they send
That Leela had
texts on
left for her mother's
holidays.
place, and that the silence afterward was
I
louder
used
than
to
any
make
fight.
sweaters for my
He asked
children.
if we could talk. I haven't
Now they
replied
send
yet,
texts
not because
on
I'm angry,
holidays.
but because I need him to understand.
I
Forgiveness
used to
is
make
not a door you
sweaters for my
knock
children.
on, it's one you build yourself.
Now they send
One
texts
morning,
on
during the
holidays.
ribbon cutting for Grace House, a young woman named Carla
I used
approached
to make
me.
sweaters
She
for
had
my
bruises
children.
beneath her sleeves, and eyes
Now they
too old
send
for her
texts
age.
on
She looked at the
holidays.
walls and whispered, I've never had a place that
I
felt
used to
safe.
make sweaters
I handed
for
her
my
the keys
children.
to one of the rooms.
Now
You do
they
now.
send texts
That
on
night,
holidays.
I sat in the same chair I had once watched Leela mock
I
me
used
from,
to make
but now
sweaters
it was
for my
filled with
children.
books, flowers, and
Now
art
they
made by
send
women who had
texts on
found their voices
holidays.
again. The home no longer belonged to
I
pride
used to
or
make
performance.
sweaters for
It
my
belonged
children.
to truth. The truth that
Now they
wealth is
send
not gold,
texts on
and family is not
holidays.
blood. Wealth is peace. Family
I
is
used to
those
make
who value your
sweaters for my
presence,
children.
not just your presence.
Now they
Leela
send
once said,
texts on
we don't
holidays.
do poor gifts in this family. I smiled at that
I used
memory
to make
now,
sweaters
because
for
she
my
was right.
children.
We don't. We
Now
do
they
rich
send
hearts.
texts
We do
on
quiet
holidays.
strength. We do unshakable dignity. And that,
I used to
I've
make
come to
sweaters
realize,
for my
was
children.
always the real inheritance.
Now they
If this
send
story spoke to
texts on
something
holidays.
inside you, subscribe now. Because one day,
I used
the
to make
quiet ones
sweaters
always
for my
rise.
children.